Hi guys, Professor O'Brien here, recording a shortish lecture, we hope, on rhetorical grammar, chapter 8, choosing adverbials. And I'm doing a little adventurous today. I'm recording this on a MacBook and reading my lecture notes off my PC, which is my primary computer. So we'll see how this goes. And of course the book as well. Hope all is well, and I hope the change we made to the course has made things a little easier. Page 141, and the first of 6 short sections in this chapter. Basically a mention of adverbials, but you know what? I'll jump up first. I'm getting ahead of myself. What's the goal of this class? Well, there are 4 according to the top of the page here. Number 1, to be able to identify and discuss the use of adverbials by other writers. 2, to add variety. I think this is the primary goal. Add variety to your writing by including adverbials. Because I think a subset of that is the 3rd bullet point here, placing adverbials purposefully, punctuating them appropriately. And finally, using adverbials to link short clauses. It's the same thing again. That's really a subset of the 2nd bullet point, is it not? Now, what's an adverb? You've learned, certainly in middle school, that an adverb modifies a verb. But what you might not have learned is that an adverb modifies more than a verb. We spoke at the start of this course about how adverbs are the trash can category. And it's because they can do so much that we tend to throw words that we're not quite sure about, which we're not quite sure of their purpose, into the category adverb, which is a shame. We're going to ignore some of the more unusual adverbs and simply stick to adverbs that either modify verbs or, and here's the important bit, modify sentences. That's the 2nd major use of adverbs, and it's what we're most interested in this unit of the course. You'll in fact find that the 6th unit of this class on dependent clauses is the longest section. And it might seem strange for me to say a dependent clause can be an adverbial, but of course it is. It's providing more information so that you can make more sense of the main clause. So yes, it's not just single words or a small group of words like a prepositional phrase. It can be whole clauses that behave like adverbials. So that brings me to the next distinction between adverbs and adverbials. What's the difference? Well, it's the same as the difference between adjectives and adjectivals, or nouns and nominals. An adverbial is simply a word, a group of words, or a long group of words that behaves like an adverb. So for instance, Johnny ran home with great speed. Now you'll recognize that with great speed is a prepositional phrase, but you could also just say Johnny ran home quickly, right? Now quickly is an adverb, but what's with great speed? It's a prepositional phrase acting like an adverb and is therefore itself an adverbial. There. But one of the major points that this first section makes here, section A, the movable adverbials, is that adverbs can move. Johnny ran home quickly. Johnny ran quickly home. Johnny quickly ran home. Adverbs can move. Adverbials can move also. And this is one of their most useful features. Because of course, we've been learning about sentence structure and how stress patterns can change. Knowing how, when, and where to put adverbials can have a striking effect on your style. And again, finally, this is what this course is all about, style, right? You remember, because I keep saying this, sentences consist of a subject and a predicate. John slept, or the very unhappy woman kicked the cat. The very unhappy woman's the subject, kicked the cat is the predicate. Where do adverbs go? Because they're so movable, you sometimes find them at the start of sentences. Quickly, the woman kicked the cat. That might sound a little bit awkward, but it works. Is quickly part of the subject? It's actually not. Adverbs are so movable that you can actually jump them right over the subject and put them at the start of the sentence sometimes. But they're still part of the predicate. So bear that in mind. Why would we open a sentence with an adverbial? Well, the top of page 142 will tell you why. We want to set the scene. And so often we find sentences, particularly in great rhetoric, opening sentences. When in the course of human events, you tell me what major document that adverbial opens. Come on, you know. 7 years ago, another major document, hopefully you know. Once upon a time. Well, can you tell me a child's story that does not end with that, does not open with that adverbial? Okay. Note, halfway down page 142, we use adverbs and adverbials to provide cohesion. Now, what's cohesion? It causes things to stick together. As the text says, the tie that connects a sentence to what has gone before. You don't want the next sentence to be an abrupt jump into something. You often want to open that sentence with an adverbial that connects it to what happened in the previous sentence. I was going to read Rachel Carson's passage aloud to you on page 142, but I'm aware that I'm already going over time. So you can read that yourselves. Look at the underlined phrases. Look at the frequency with which Rachel Carson opens her sentences with adverbials. But look how those adverbials assist in cohesion. You can feel a flow from one sentence to the next because of these adverbials. Now, we have I would recommend you to look at the group discussion exercise on page 143. What's going on with that opening adverbial at the start of the last sentence there? Can you explain its use? What it's doing? What I'm asking you to do, essentially, is think about style and rhetoric. Why would you use an adverbial? What does it do to the passage that you find it in, or the sentence that you find it in? Now, exercise 24, another very good exercise, well worth doing. It will give you a sense of how you might revise a passage with adverbs and adverbials in mind. Read through that passage, revise it if you wish, and ask yourself as you revise, what adverbs did I move? What adverbials did I move? How did I change this passage? All right. Now, page 144. There are various kinds of adverb. I'm going to jump ahead to 145 for a moment and draw your attention to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kinds of adverbs and adverbials that you can find. Adverbs of direction, place, time, duration, manner, and cause. And you'll note how movable adverbs of manner are. Look at the first example there, halfway down page 144. My roommate is seriously thinking about changing her major. Well, you can move that, can't you? My roommate is thinking seriously about changing her major. How is the sentence changed? Now, what's going to happen if you move that seriously to the start of the sentence? Because as it stands, we've been using it as a verb modifier. The roommate is doing the serious thinking, right? Well, let's see. Bottom of the page. Seriously, my roommate is thinking about changing her major. Ah. It's not modifying the verb anymore, is it? It's modifying the whole sentence. In a way, the speaker is saying, I'm speaking seriously, my roommate, blah, blah, blah. Be careful where you put your adverbs. They're highly movable, but they can change the meaning of the sentences they're in. Right. We have adverbs. In fact, you can add an ly to nearly any adjective you can think of and turn it into an adverb. Although be careful, not every ly word is an adverb. But you can also use prepositional phrases as adverbs. And that's what the section beginning page 145 deals with. Now, you'll see several examples there. Adverbials of, or prepositional phrases of direction, toward the pond. We walked toward the pond. Prepositional phrases of place. Near the marina. We stood near the marina. Adverbials of time. We arrived on Sunday afternoon. Adverbials of duration. We stayed until 3 o'clock. Adverbials of manner. The volcano exploded in an appalling series of eruptions. Adverbials of cause. The telephone lines were down because of the storm. Now, the most important point I want to make to you about prepositional phrases being used as adverbials is how overused they are. I fully agree with the text on this matter here. Now, if you speak Spanish, you may be aware of how often you use de, much more often than you use of in English. And you often find speakers of Spanish, although I'm not blaming just speakers of Spanish, I'm also blaming others for overusing of. Let's see. Editors, newspaper editors, are very hostile to small words. You will very frequently find newspaper editors scanning text and crossing off the ins, the ofs, the outs, the tos, and so on. What most of these small words have in common is that they're prepositions. Now, it's not prepositions that the editors hate, it's the phrases that they usually contain. Johnny walked out of the house in an angry manner. Hopefully you recognize there's a prepositional phrase there, in an angry manner. Why not just turn that into an adverb? Johnny walked out of the house angrily. The point here is that we have a huge tendency to use prepositional phrases when we really should be using adverbs. So be careful. Now, the text provides a not fantastic example, but it'll do for purpose. Look at the offset sentence 1/3 of the way down page 146. You can undoubtedly find many such sentences in the pages of this book. There's a nice rhythm to that sentence, isn't there? Now, let's look what happens when we replace some of the phrases there with prepositional phrases, with unnecessary adverbials. And you are all guilty of this. I'm guilty of this too. So here we go. You can undoubtedly find many such sentences in the pages of this book about the grammar of English for writers. Holy God, how many prepositions is that? In the pages of this book about the grammar of English for writers. 5 prepositional phrases in a row. And you can hear what happened. The rhythm has gone skewed and the focus of the sentence has been lost. Beware of prepositional phrases. And be aware of what the text calls them, redundant modifiers. There's somebody else supposedly once asked Ernest Hemingway how to write a novel. He said, well, you write the novel and then you cut it by 1/3. Sorry, you cut 2/3 of it. I think that's what he said anyway. And a great deal of what he cut from his first drafts was things like prepositional phrases. It's just empty stuff. It's redundant material. Okay. I'm going to mostly ignore section D here, noun phrases. Yes, they can behave like adverbials. They worked 10 solid hours. But really all you're doing is jettisoning the preposition, right? They worked for 10 solid hours. Again, I think this might be under the influence of Romance languages. You'll forgive my my terrible Spanish here. I'm sure I'm making 100 errors. Trabajaron 10 horas. It would sound odd, I think, to say something like trabajaron para 10 horas or trabajaron por 10 horas. You just put the 10 hours in. Llegamos el 5 de mayo, right? You just put the noun phrase in and it behaves like a prepositional phrase and therefore an adverbial. All right, verb phrases. I'm on to page 147 here. Now, hopefully you'll agree with me that the to go fishing phrase in the following sentence is adverbial. Jack got up early that morning to go fishing. Now think about that. You could put the period after morning. Jack got up early that morning, period. That to go fishing is providing more information, specifically about why Jack got up. It's an adverbial phrase, isn't it? But it's fundamentally an infinitive, to go fishing. So you can add infinitive phrases to sentences and they behave like adverbials. Now, take a look at the 2 asterisked sentences at the bottom of page 147. They'll sound okay in conversation, but they're stylistically failures. To keep your grades up, a regular study schedule is important. Now, the problem is that you are keeping the grades up in the opening clause, but there's no you in the main clause. Let's look at the second one. For decades, the Superstition Mountains in Arizona have been explored in order to find the fabled lost Dutchman mine. Now the problem here is there's no subject at all, right? Who's doing the exploring? So there seems to be this invisible entity searching for the fabled lost Dutchman mine. Put a subject back in and make sure it's the same subject for the infinitive in the adverbial clause. It isn't really a clause, it's a fragment, and the main clause. So let's see how the fixes work at the top of page 148. To keep your grades up, you ought to follow a regular study schedule. Aha! So now we have the same subject for both the infinitive and the main clause. And the second example, hopefully you'll have recognized, by the way, the use of the passive voice in the second sentence. Let's get rid of that passive voice and put a subject in. Might just be people, but that's fine. For decades, people have explored the Superstition Mountains in Arizona to find the fabled lost Dutchman mine. Now, hopefully you'll recognize that people is the subject of the exploring and the finding. So yes, take a look at the two rules there. In the shaded box on page 148, the subject of the adverbial infinitive is also the subject of the main clause. And secondly, which should have been mentioned earlier, I think, an infinitive phrase that opens the sentence is always set off by a comma. But you can put this another way. Any adverbial clause opening a sentence is set off by a comma. Always, always, always. Okay, now this section here, beginning page 148, is the longest section of the chapter, and with good reason. A dependent clause is also an adverbial because it provides more information about the main clause. But remember, adverbials move. Now, what else can an adverbial clause, a dependent clause do? Well, it's an entire sentence. It's got a subject and a predicate. It's simply being introduced by a subordinator, a subordinating conjunction of some form. So it can provide a great deal of extra information. And that's why subordinating clauses are so important. And it drives me batty that student writers don't use subordinating clauses as much as they should. Use of and control of subordinating clauses can make for very, very powerful sentences. Practice these and you will become great writers. I promise. Now, there are 8 groups of purposes, reasons for having subordinating clauses provided at the top of page 149. Honestly, these could be used for any adverbials, but they're particularly applicable to subordinating clauses. And these are subordinating conjunctions that are used to introduce subordinating clauses. So take, for example, the second category there, concession, and you have subordinating conjunctions such as though, although, even though, if, and while. I'll jump ahead and then I'll jump back again. I'm just going down to 2/3 of the way down, page 149. Although we worked hard for our candidates, we suspected they didn't stand a chance. You can see the how the although there is subordinating that opening clause. Now, allow me to draw your attention to the two observations halfway down page 149, which are very important. Number one, it's very easy and happens a lot that the wrong idea gets subordinated. And, number two, the meaning of the subordinating conjunction is imprecise. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a little confused by the first sentence provided 2/3 of the way down the sentence there. Although we worked hard for our candidates, we suspected they didn't stand a chance. Now, the problem here, in my mind, is that the new information is coming first, although we worked hard for our candidates. And the given information, the principal idea of the sentence, is coming second. I feel that the second version of that sentence, even though it isn't a repair, is far superior. We worked hard for our candidates, even though we suspected they didn't stand a chance. There's a statement, what we did, and an explanation or a concession coming afterwards. Now, we're into very gray territory here. But I'm going to suggest that the reason the second sentence is more successful, and you might not agree with me, by the way, is that it is a subset of the principal sentence. That is to say, we have a sentence within a sentence. Since it's a subset, why put it at the start? Why not put the main information first and then the subset sentence, that is to say, the subordinate clause, after that? I think that makes a lot more sense. Okay, page 150. I have to say, I feel that exercise 25 is an excellent exercise. I very, very strongly recommend that you attempt it. Now, the instructions may be a bit confusing, so I'll explain them again. What you want to do, you've been provided with an independent sentence. The party ended at midnight. Cleo couldn't pay her phone bill last month, etc. What I want you to do with these sentences is turn them into subordinate clauses. So the example provided is the party ended at midnight. Turn that statement into a subordinate clause. Because the party ended at midnight. If the party ended at midnight. So you got two possible alternatives here. We got home earlier than expected because the party ended at midnight. The second the second version is, if the party ended at midnight, why did they get home at 3 a.m.? You get the idea. So what I want you to do is to use a variety of the subordinating conjunctions at the top of page 149 and turn each of the sentences in 1 to 6 in exercise 25 into subordinate clauses using subordinating conjunctions. Okay, punctuation of adverbial clauses. This is important in page 151. And the most important point is the one in the grayed box, 1/3 of the way down page 151. If you open a sentence with an adverbial clause, make sure there's a comma after it. Now, what about if the adverbial clause comes after? Well, it's kind of optional then. Look at the two examples provided at the bottom of page 151. In the first, this is the Pat went to parties, there's no comma. Pat went to parties only when he knew everyone who had been invited. Now, it's pretty clear that Pat is only going to the parties if he knows everyone at the who's been invited. So there's a very intimate connection between the second clause and the first. So we typically don't put a comma in there. Now, what about the second one? Pat went to the party, although she didn't know everyone who had been invited. Is the relationship between the subordinate clause and the main clause so intimate? I don't think so. They're slightly further apart, and we mark that by throwing the comma in. But remember, in both of those cases, the subordinate clause is coming after the main clause. There's an excellent example of this at the top of page 152, where Sean didn't compete, comma, because he hates competition, and then Sean didn't compete because he hates competition. I think I said comma. What's the difference between the two? Well, in the first case, Sean didn't compete, and he had a reason for doing that. In the second case, he didn't compete because he hates competition. He just didn't compete because he wasn't feeling well. So think about the relationship between the clauses there, and note this section's final point here. Commas between a main clause and a subordinating clause, if the subordinating clause comes second, is still a grey area. Ask yourself if you need your comma or not. Right, page 152 here. We're back onto movability again. Now, if you're opening a sentence with an adverbial clause, you're often supplying the transition from the previous sentence or paragraph. But what if it goes somewhere else? Take a look at the examples set off there just before the end of page 152. I learned later that night, when ties are loosened during a coffee break, that I am wrong. What's it doing there? Well, it's got several purposes. Number one, the text says it's slowing the reader down. I agree with that. This clearly has a lot to do with sentence rhythm. Secondly, the text suggests that it's adding stress and length to the word just preceding the clause. Maybe. Now, regarding the brother when he was only 4 years old, read the three sentences aloud. The one set off at the very end of page 152, and the other two versions where the adverbial clause gets moved. Ask yourself, how has the feeling, the rhythm, the meaning, the stress points of the sentence changed? Okay, now, you have been, not all of you, but many of you have been told, don't begin a sentence with because. And the reason you've been taught this is because of the sort of errors that you see 2/3 of the way down page 153. Everyone agreed that the call was unfair, period, because the replay showed that the player had not been fouled. Now, that second sentence is clearly an error because it's a subclause. The because marks it as a subclause, but there's no main clause. However, you can begin sentences with because, as long as you ensure that there's a main clause in the sentence as well. Let's see. What I could do is take the sentence just towards the end of page 153 there and put the because clause at the start, and you'll see what I mean. Because the replay showed that the player had not been fouled, everyone agreed that the call was unfair. Now you see, you have an opening subclause, because the replay showed, etc., and you have the main clause. Everyone agreed that the call was unfair. So yes, you can begin sentences with because, just make sure there's a main clause there as well. Exercise 26 is an excellent exercise. I strongly recommend that you try it. See if you can combine those groups of sentences into single sentences by using subordinating strategies. Now, the section at the bottom of page 154 on elliptical adverbial clauses is really just pointing out a common error. Take a look at the sentence 1/3 of the way down page 155. While waiting for the bus, the police arrested a pickpocket at the edge of the crowd. Why were the police waiting for a bus? Now, obviously, the speaker means I was waiting for the bus and I saw the police arrest a pickpocket. The point is, the I is not there. Now, when you see infinitive or participial clauses, like while waiting for the bus, their subject is always the subject of the main clause. So the main clause in that sentence is the police arrested a pickpocket, etc. So that automatically means that the police are going to be the subject of the participial clause as well, while waiting for the bus. And the only way we can change that is by giving the while waiting for a bus another subject. While I was waiting for the bus, I saw the police arrest a pickpocket. I see now. Okay, so be careful, be aware of those elliptical adverbial clauses. I love exercise 27, beginning at the top of page 155 there. I strongly recommend that you go through it. It's an excellent overview of what we've been doing. Okay, so I'm going to finish this lecture, and I look forward to discussing its material with you in our next lecture. In our next class meeting. So take it easy, everybody. Goodbye.